Hey party people! Welcome to the August 2019 collaboration Spooky Landscape. We start by gathering some references, anything that we find inspiring visually, colors, shapes, moods, what have you. And, there's my hands. Let's start by binding our paper to the board, measuring out some of our gum framing tape, some nice clean water, brushing them down until they glisten, but don't drip. No sopping wet tape for us, you know what I mean? And bind it down onto our pre-measured lines on the paper. Take our Hake brush and wet the paper down. Again, glistening, not sopping wet. Dab away excess moisture and blow dry to get it nice and stretched to the board. Then we begin the long process of drawing. Taking a lot of visual cues from the references that we've gathered, we're trying to create something with a very particular mood. For me, I'm going for something fleshy and uncomfortable. There's a lot of different ways that horror or spooky art tends to be successful. And one of my favorite ways to create something spooky is to mirror humanity in ways that you feel like it shouldn't be mirrored. So following the idea that I came up with, trying to mirror humanity or living organisms in places or forms that we feel is wrong, I wanted to create almost a human feel to the trees. So I made them a bit softer looking, a bit fleshier, and want to include some indications of rib cages to make it seem like something has gone awry, as it were, and putting them inside of the fly geyser. So yes, the nice layered, tiered rock formations, and also included some strange eldritch eyeball octopus starfish thing. Just things that feel wrong. And I also started to feel like it was a bit empty, even if it was populated with these strange, nasty trees and nasty little critters. So I've decided to add in a monstrous little form. I wanted it to, again, be quite human at first glance, but for it to just be wrong. So I've added a strange face, lots of little eyeballs, some mandibles, and some claws and stuff, you know what I mean? And here we go. Picking out our colors, going with a nice warm fleshy color scheme, but I also want to include some nice bright water to contrast the orange beautifully. And I like the idea of trying to follow closely to the fly geyser reference and keep the water looking nice and juicy. Oh, excuse me, Midna. Get out of here. So we've got our oval wash brush washing down the surface, getting everything nice and wet, and then we can start blobbing in our colors for our first layer. I like to use this layer to plan where things are going, not necessarily cover things perfectly, but giving myself visual reminders of where I want some stuff to go, but also trying to cover a lot of ground so that there's not a lot of empty space. Here we go. Oh, we can really see what I'm going for here with the color that we're layering onto the tree, something nice and fleshy. Also kind of reeks of freshly spilled blood. those blooms. Wow, look at it go. Oh, dang. Trying to get some variation in our initial paint strokes while keeping in mind that things are going to bloom, trying to add in a couple of drier strokes. Just because the background isn't going to get too much detail and attention to create a nice sense of depth, we want there to be at least some sharpness. Some sharpness for funsies. As the paint starts to dry a bit, we add in a few more layers just to keep some things darker, some things a little bit sharper. Just going through and really just feeling it out. Starting to add in a bit more detail to some of the other stuff that I feel like I'm losing. You know, once you start layering paint in, your line work tends to kind of vanish a bit, so just trying to keep an eye on it, maybe add in some few details as I see fit. Not quite sure what color I want the fleshy man to be quite yet, so I'm avoiding him altogether until I have a better idea. Plus, it'll be easier to deal with him kind of on his own while I'm busy thinking about other things. And it's time to blow dry, get our first layer solidified into the paper, and re-stretch the paper down to the board to keep it nice and flat. The longer you work with it, the longer you add paint and water in, the more chances that it will ripple and start pooling, and it will. So you want to take some time every once in a while, reach a nice point of progress to blow dry it down to flatten it back out again. And it solidifies the paint into the paper. You know me, I like to get the background out of the way as much as I can, so that I can spend most of my time focusing on the foreground. So I'm just adding in a couple of background details in some of the most neutral color that we have, something not quite as eye-catching, but still falls within the color scheme, so it's not as confusing. And using the same color to deal with our foreground, but also still quite a neutral color so that it doesn't take too much interest away from our subjects. So the first thing I've decided to work on... Oh, hey Griffin, get out of here. Get out of here. Oh, you... Okay, all right. Well, I guess I'll work around you. So the first thing I've decided to work on are the pools of water with our little eyeball starfish critters. Okay, Griffin, you're really getting in my way now. So we're just adding in some details just to show the depth of the water and to re-carve out the limbs of the creature so that I don't lose them. Get out. Get out of here. And the paint has started to dry a bit, so we add in just a bit of water to pull some pigment out. Because we don't want it to look super deep. We want them to be shallow pools, but pools nonetheless. So I have dedicated myself to the pools at this point, so we're just going around adding some depth to the pools. And when they start to dry a bit, we can go back in with some water and pull out some pigment. At the same time as we're pulling out pigment, we'll go back in with some of the drier paint just to add a bit of contrast back in. It's a constant pull and push game, watercolor. You want to make sure your paintings have a full range of value. And we have solidified our light source, so now that we are absolutely certain, we go and start glazing in some shadows and forms into the trees. It is nice and backlit, although somewhat diffused, so it's not as intense. So let's go through and make sure that the outsides are pretty well lit and the insides of the form are darker. Honestly, I don't have a lot of advice on how to do this. I'm not very confident in my skills, but I'm just having fun, so let's just see how this happens. Gonna do the same to the tree in the background, but we don't want it to be quite as dark as the tree in the foreground because of distance and such. If we gave it the same amount of contrast... Oh, hello there, Griffin. Knock it off. If we give it the same amount of contrast as the tree in the foreground, it will be visually confusing. The further things are in the distance, the more diffused they are. The more transparent, the less crisp, the less detailed. In order to create something that appears to have depth, we want to make sure that it's not as contrasty. And here I go adding a bunch of contrast anyway, so what are you gonna do, right? Little kitty nose to the bottom left. Oh, he's so sweet. Let's get it blow dried to get our paint nice and solidified in. And we're starting to work on the forms of the little eyeball starfish. Because they are underwater, we don't want to give them as much form and detail as the things that are above water that will be easier to see, less distorted, but we do want them to be obvious. So we're giving them a decent amount of detailing, but not too much. I know that's not helpful at all, but you know. And we start adding in some color variation. Overall, we want them to stay quite monochromatic to imply that their color and form is being distorted by being underwater. But having just some indications of additional color will help them stand out as living creatures a little bit more, I think. Apparently I was not satisfied with the amount of contrast, so I've added a little bit more. And trying to go along and do the same to all the other ones just to keep them as consistent as possible. If I go on for too long, my mindset will change and I'll forget what I did, and I'll try to do something else and it'll look weird. So let's get into it. some more of this color up. Yeah, just scrape the dregs out, I guess. And it looks like I'm just going with a fleshy color. Wish I'd known that beforehand. I probably could have just washed them down with everything else. Oh well, you win some, you lose some. Let's wash this guy down. Trying to keep in mind our backlit lighting, but also the fact that he is behind something that is already catching the light. So trying to keep him accurately shadowed to the scene. Well, looks like we're back on the starfish again. What are you gonna do? Griffin? Okay. Yeah, all right. So we are snuggling this kitty boy, and okay, he's gone now. Layering in our contrast on our dude. Perfect time to start pulling pigment out, so as the paper is completely dry, just load up your brush with wet, or water as the humans say, and start agitating or scrubbing the surface of the area that you want to remove pigment. Looks like I gotta change brushes because the one I was using was a bit too soft. You want something that has more rigid bristles. So your blends, your synthetics, they're really great for this. I like to keep a piece of toilet paper or paper towel handy to help dab off the extra pigment that sits on the surface once you pull it out. And we're adding a bit of shadowing in just to help to create the sense of form that would be created based on the light source. And continuing to try to make it a bit more accurate on our dude as well. Trying to give our foreground a bit more contrast to help it grab and hold on to the eye a little bit longer. And this part of the game just becomes pushing and pulling with pigment yet again. Trying to find the perfect amount of contrast, pulling pigment out to lighten things up, adding some of our darker tones in to pull things down. It can take a while, but you'll tend to feel it. This is how I like to create most of my subtler highlights. And my more intense highlights are created with a white Posca paint pen. White Posca paint pen, white Posca paint pen, white Posca paint pen. Not bad. But for the background, lifting pigment will do. Gives the background backlit tree a nice beautiful glow, but isn't horribly intense. Start to lift a bit out from the background where most of the light should be coming from. And then starting to pull pigment out from our foreground tree. We want it to at least match the background tree. We'll also be making it a little bit more intense, just so the detail is accurate for a foreground subject. Let's start pulling some pigment out of our friend. Try to make him glow a little bit. Oh, he's just lovely. And the light source on him that's closer to us probably isn't all that accurate, but I had fun, so what are you gonna do? Let's add a bit on our little friendly starfish friend. Friendly starfish friend. Alright. And trying to make the water glow a little bit by pulling some pigment out of it. Not trying to make the lifting as blended so that it gives it more of a rippled water effect. I don't know if it worked, but I like it. The lifting pulled a bit of contrast out of him at the same time, so let's go back with the darkest color in our palette and add a bit back in. Given he's being backlit, the shadows on him should be pretty intense. Splatters. I don't know why. Let's just splatter it. Ah, the white paint Posca pen is out. Trying to brighten up the area in the background where the light source should be coming from. And since I don't have my Derwent Inktense white ink block, looks like I'm doing a bit of filling in with it. Taking it to where I want it to go, and then with a wet paintbrush, coaxing it out a bit so that it blends a bit better. And then hitting up the details. Doing quite the same, while the paint from the pen is still wet, taking a wet brush and blending it around. Oh, that's a bit intense. Let's pull that down a bit. I guess his ribs are glowing. Who cares? Ah, I love highlighting. I suppose you could tell by how long this is taking. We seem to be doing a little bit more lifting. The tree didn't have quite the amount of form variation that I wanted. And it's looking quite a bit better now. Let's coax out a bit more form in the tree. I want it to look real fleshy. And let's continue with the paint pen. Why not, right? Remember to blow dry. Almost forgot about the rib cages I wanted in the tree. Perfect time to start pulling them out. Using up the last of this paint to continue with the background. Coaxing out a bit more form. And back to the paint pen. Paint pen. Adding some details into the water itself and on top of a lot of the form from the starfish to pull down the bit that's underwater and help to show you what's coming out on top of the water. I think it looks pretty good. And now let's start doing some line work with our Pigma Micron fine liners. I do a bit of a nouveau style. I like to have my outer lines quite a bit thicker than my inner lines. And since this project used hot press paper rather than cold press, the pen is loving it. And the paper is not fighting us at all. Look at how I haven't had to scribble on the side of the paper yet to wake up the ink. Oh, it's just glorious. So we're working on the outer lines, and then we go through and do some hatching for the inner lines before we move on to a thinner pen. Oh, hello there, big boy. Get out of here. don't know. I guess he has a tongue. Who knows, right? I'm keeping the starfish outlining strictly to the parts that are out of the water, to keep the parts that are in the water still a bit distorted and difficult to focus on. I think it helps add quite a bit of depth. I'm so unused to a paper that so readily accepts pen that some of the ink is a bit intense for me, and I have trouble adjusting, but it is what it is. Griffin, you big boy. Okay, well, all right. What a good boy. Look at that paw. All right. Oh, you know what? Okay, come on. Oh, there he is. Bottom right. Look at his little face. All right, Griffin, come on. I need to ink this tree. Stop distracting your mother. Again, with the intense line work, I didn't expect for it to be quite so vivid. I spent quite a bit of time trying to compensate for it, but you win some, you lose some, right? And there I go, just making it worse. Nice. Dear Lord, stop. it! Well... that's gonna do it. I hope you enjoyed this video. I plan on making them all quite a bit more like this. And I had a lot of fun doing this painting, and thank you guys for voting for this theme. It was very relaxing for me, and I hope you guys had a great time too. Thank you so much for your support of my art on Patreon, and I will catch you guys next time. Bye for now.